Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Imagine preparing for the most brutal, freezing, isolated deployment of your life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, your first instinct is probably to gather supplies, right? You want to plot your map and build an unshakable mindset.
Right. You want to be totally ready,
Yeah, you look at the hostile environment and say, I have the strength to conquer this. You pump yourself up.
which makes total sense.
But what if the only way to survive that wilderness was to systematically obliterate your own self-confidence?
I mean, that goes against every single instinct of human survival.
It really does.
We stockpile material goods
Yeah.
and we stockpile emotional security too. We just want to feel capable before we step into the unknown.
Yeah, that is the standard operating procedure for pretty much everyone.
Definitely.
But today we are looking at the historical record of a man preparing for one of the most grueling assignments imaginable, and that entire playbook is just thrown out the window.
It's totally gone.
So our mission for this deep dive is to investigate the internal and external realities of a man named David Brainerd.
And we are looking at primary texts for this, specifically excerpts from the life and diary of David Brainerd.
Right, which was edited by Jonathan Edwards. And we are zeroing in on a very intense window of time.
We are looking at November 1742 to March 1743.
Yeah, because Brainerd is preparing for a rigorous missionary deployment among the Native Americans at Kaunaumeek.
And it is not an easy place to go.
No, not at all. So I want to speak directly to you, the listener, right now. Your daily life might not involve riding horses through freezing colonial winters, you know,
Probably not.
and you might not be sleeping in the wilderness, but the intense internal battles, the mental friction Brainerd experiences, the feeling of being totally overwhelmingly inadequate for the task set before you,
Oh, yeah.
that is going to resonate with anyone who has ever faced an impossible standard.
So the scene for this specific period, Brainerd is constantly on the move.
He is everywhere.
Yeah, he is traveling through New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. He is leaving behind the comforts of settled colonial towns.
And his friends, too.
Right. He is leaving all that to enter a brutal, unforgiving frontier. And the theological backdrop here is so crucial for understanding his diary.
It frames everything he writes.
Yes, Brainerd evaluates every single emotion, every physical ailment, and every interaction through a very specific lens.
And that lens is humanity's total, absolute reliance on divine grace.
He evaluates his life through a standard that leaves, well, zero room for human achievement.
Let us examine his diary entries from late November, specifically November 26th and 27th. The language is, it is jarring.
It is very heavy.
He refers to himself as dust and ashes.
Wow.
And he writes about an unspeakable unworthiness. He goes as far as to say that whatever outward sins other people might be committing, none of those people are conscious of so much guilt before God as he is.
He genuinely believes he is the most vile person walking the earth.
Yes, he does. And the intensity of his language, it only increases as he moves into early December.
It is darker.
It does. He complains of his leanness, barrenness, carnality.
And then he describes his own heart as an unfathomable abyss of desperate wickedness.
An unfathomable abyss. Just think about that phrasing.
Then, on December 19th, he talks about experiencing a humbling sense of his own vileness.
Right, and he is wounded by the thought of his misimprovement of time.
We really need to pause and analyze this extreme self-critique carefully.
Yeah, because a modern reader might look at these journal entries and immediately diagnose Brainerd with severe clinical low self-esteem.
Or some sort of destructive mental health condition.
But wait, I need to push back on this right away. How do we know this is not just a destructive mental health condition?
That is a fair question.
Because how does someone function daily when they view themselves as an unfathomable abyss of desperate wickedness?
It sounds awful.
I have to imagine that kind of internal monologue would completely paralyze a person. It just sounds like psychological self-harm.
Well, it would absolutely paralyze someone if their goal was self-actualization.
Oh, sure.
Or personal empowerment.
Yeah.
But Brainerd is operating under a strict theological conviction.
Right.
He perceives a massive, infinite gap between God's absolute holiness and his own fallen human nature.
That makes sense.
In his framework, the closer he gets to God, the more glaring his own flaws become.
Oh, I see.
It is a matter of proximity to perfection. The realization of his own sinfulness is not the end goal, you know. It is the starting line for communion with a holy creator.
Okay, I was thinking about this, like walking into a room that has been dark for a long time.
Okay, yeah.
Suddenly, someone throws open the curtains, and the room is flooded with harsh, direct, midday sunlight.
I like this.
That sunlight does not create the dust in the air.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The dust was always hanging there.
Right. It was always there. But the light suddenly makes every single speck visible. You suddenly see how much debris you are actually breathing in.
Wow. Yeah.
Brainerd is essentially standing in the blinding light of divine holiness.
And because he is standing in that intense light, he is seeing all the spiritual dust that other people simply do not notice.
Because they are standing in the dark.
Yes. For Brainerd, this realization is not meant to destroy his will to live. It is the exact mechanism that forces him to rest entirely on divine provision.
Okay, that clarifies it.
Recognizing his abyss of sin actively kills his pride. If he believed he was strong, he would rely on his own strength in the wilderness.
And he would fail.
Big time. By recognizing his total inadequacy, he empties himself, making room for divine assistance.
He becomes fit for his impending assignment.
Spot on.
But you would think a guy who hates his own sin this much,
Yeah.
a guy who calls himself an abyss of wickedness, would be incredibly forgiving of the flaws of others.
You would assume that, yeah.
You would assume he would look at his neighbors and think, well, I am terrible, so I cannot judge you. But paradoxically, his strict internal standard made him fiercely critical of the religious culture around him.
Very critical.
He is looking at the people in the churches he visits, and he is not holding back. On December 14th, he is distressed over what he calls the false appearances of religion.
He says they breed confusion.
And hinder vital piety. He actually preaches from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 8, to undermine this false religion.
That is a strong verse to choose.
It is. That verse talks about how anyone who rejects these instructions is not rejecting man, but God. He is taking a very hard line.
We have to place Brainerd in his historical context to understand what he is reacting against here.
Right, the 1740s.
Yes, right in the middle of the Great Awakening.
Which was wild.
The colonies are experiencing massive, noisy, highly emotional religious revivals. You have traveling preachers drawing massive crowds.
Huge crowds for that era.
And people are having intense physical reactions. They are fainting, crying out, and experiencing dramatic emotional swings.
So Brainerd is walking into these towns, seeing people weeping or shouting in the meeting houses, and he is highly suspicious of it all.
Extremely suspicious. He is drawing a razor-sharp line between vital piety, which he understands as authentic, humble devotion to God,
Okay.
and what he calls selfish religion or extravagances.
Extravagances, that is a great word for it.
On January 28th in New London, he finds people carried away with a false zeal and bitterness.
Bitterness.
Yeah, and he notes they lack a gospel temper. He is seeing a lot of religious excitement, but he identifies it as counterfeit because it is accompanied by harshness rather than humility.
This introduces a massive theme in his writing during this period, which is the concept of frames.
Frames, yes.
In January, specifically the 19th in Canterbury and the 26th at Stonington, he explicitly tells congregations not to set up their own frames as a standard to try their brethren by.
We should define that for the listener.
Good call. For you listening, when Brainerd uses the word frames, he is talking about a person's internal, emotional, or spiritual state on any given day.
Your frame of mind.
Yeah, your emotional highs and lows. He is warning people not to use their own emotional highs as a rigid measuring stick to evaluate the faith of the person sitting next to them in the pews.
And the religious culture of his day was very prone to making those judgments.
Oh, absolutely.
People who experienced those dramatic frames often looked down on those who experienced a quieter, more steady faith.
They thought they were less spiritual.
Right. And Brainerd saw this as a breeding ground for a party spirit and division.
It just creates factions.
On February 20th, he preaches closely against selfish religion that loves Christ for his benefits but not for himself.
He is warning against a faith that only exists for the emotional high it gives the believer.
Yes.
There is a staggering level of irony here, though.
How so?
Well, Brainerd is a man who's obsessively monitoring his own intense internal frames.
Oh, that's so true.
He writes down every single dip into melancholy, every spike into spiritual joy. He is hyper-focused on his internal temperature.
He's constantly checking it.
Yet he is the one standing in front of a congregation, warning them not to use their feelings to judge others.
It is wild.
He knows exactly how volatile his own emotions are, so he refuses to let emotions be the ultimate standard of truth.
His self-awareness is remarkable.
It really is.
He recognizes that true knowledge of God should result as a kind disposition toward mankind. He sees the harsh, censorious nature of these excited converts as proof that their zeal is entirely false.
Because vital piety produces humility.
Yes, false appearances produce arrogance, bitterness, and division. He refuses to accept any religious experience that does not make a person more charitable.
So Brainerd goes from warning people against relying on emotional highs to experiencing heights of spiritual fervor that are almost difficult to comprehend.
They really are.
We see this in his diary entries where he describes penetrating the immaterial world.
The contrast here is stunning.
He goes from being hyper-aware of his own physical and emotional corruption to experiencing these moments where the physical world just ceases to exist for him.
Let us look at December 12th in Bethlehem.
Okay.
He notes that his soul scarce ever penetrated so far into the immaterial world.
Wow.
He says his devotions were free from gross conceptions framed from beholding material objects.
That is intense.
And he repeats this on December 21st in Derby, saying his mind was unclothed of sense and imagination.
Unclothed of sense and imagination.
And led into the immaterial world of spirits. He is achieving a state of ascetic focus that completely bypasses his physical surroundings.
Unclothed of sense and imagination. What a phrase.
That is beautiful.
I think about an elite musician in a state of absolute flow.
Yes, the concept of a flow state applies perfectly here.
When a master violinist is really playing, they are not thinking about the friction of the bow on the string.
No, not at all.
They are not thinking about the wood of the instrument or the sheet music on the stand. All of those material things disappear.
They fade away.
There's only the pure, invisible essence of the music.
And in Brainerd's case, he believes the Holy Spirit is the one conducting that music.
Right.
The meeting house, the cold colonial winter, his own physical fatigue, they all fall away. And he is just interacting with the pure spirituality of his faith.
I am curious how an 18th century Calvinist practically achieves this state of mind amid physical suffering.
It is tough to imagine.
We are talking about a guy who is riding a horse through freezing rain. He is constantly sick, yet he manages to completely detach from his physical reality.
Well, Brainerd's goal was a faith entirely independent of material circumstances.
Okay.
He practiced rigorous fasting, intense periods of isolated prayer in the woods, and constant meditation on Scripture.
That took work.
A lot of work. When he talks about being unclothed of sense, he is expressing a desire to commune with God purely,
Without the distraction of worldly desire.
for physical comforts, or even his own mental imagery. On December 27th in Brantford, he experiences the pure spirituality of the religion of Christ Jesus.
And he notes that if he ever felt the temper of Christ, it was in that moment.
Yes. And on February 17th in East Hampton, he prays with a friend and feels as if he is standing on the brink of eternity.
Enjoying lively apprehensions of standing before the glorious God.
Right.
But this total radical detachment has a terrifying flip side.
Oh, it really does.
If your entire joy, your entire reason for existing, is sourced from the perceived presence of God,
Yeah.
then the perceived absence of that presence is unimaginably horrific.
Because you have nothing else.
Exactly. You have no material comforts to fall back on because you have intentionally stripped them all away.
You have isolated yourself from earthly pleasures.
So when the spiritual high drops, you are left with absolutely nothing. This plunges us into the darkest part of his diary.
The anatomy of spiritual melancholy and privation.
The plunge is sudden and severe. On January 14th, all those spiritual highs vanished.
Just gone.
Brainerd writes that his conflicts were heavier than the mountains and overflowing floods.
Such descriptive language.
He feels enclosed in hell itself, and he defines this hell specifically as a privation of God.
A privation.
He says he was deprived of all sense of God, and he explicitly states that this distress was nearest akin to the torments of the damned.
I have to stop and ask what this actually means.
Yeah, let us break it down.
How does a man who is dedicating his entire existence to God suddenly feel completely cut off from him?
It's jarring.
Furthermore, his description of hell here is fascinating. He does not go to the standard imagery of fire and brimstone or active physical punishment.
No, he does not.
He describes hell purely as privation, total abscess, the complete withdrawal of all good.
He is outlining a very strict theological framework.
Okay.
He writes that the torment of the damned will consist much in a privation of God and consequently of all good.
Right.
This extreme distress, this melancholy, serves a precise theological purpose in his preparation.
It is not random.
No. He writes that this terrifying experience taught him the absolute dependence of a creature upon God the Creator for every crumb of happiness it enjoys.
Every crumb.
By experiencing the terror of privation, he is stripped of any lingering illusion of self-sufficiency.
He learns the hard way that he cannot manufacture his own spiritual peace.
And the language he uses to describe this anguish gives us one of the most striking quotes in the entire text.
On the toad comparison.
Yes, the toad comparison. He says that without God, even if he lived forever and enjoyed not only this world, but all other worlds,
Yeah.
he would be 10,000 times more miserable than a toad.
Wow.
He says he felt like a poor wretch going to the place of execution. And then on January 23rd, he says he felt banished from the earth and shut out from the presence of God.
Noting that this feeling is more bitter than death.
Why choose a toad for this comparison?
The toad is a brilliant comparative tool here. A toad is a lowly, simple creature that acts entirely on base instinct.
Right.
It has no conception of the eternal, no awareness of a creator. Therefore, a toad cannot feel the loss of the creator.
Oh, I see.
Brainerd is arguing that a human being possessing an eternal soul capable of recognizing the divine suffers infinitely more when cut off from God than the lowliest animal ever could.
Because the animal is completely content with mud and insects.
Yes. The human soul, built for communion with the infinite, starves to death in the universe without God.
That makes a lot of sense.
Brainerd is saying that even if you gave a human all the material wealth of 1,000 worlds, it would be useless if they were experiencing the privation of God.
All the material success in the universe cannot fill a starving soul.
Spot on.
This intense realization accelerates his separation from normal society. This internal death leads directly to an external severing of ties.
We see this in the diary entries, focusing on his weanedness from the world.
And the immense physical cost of his calling. He is actively severing his earthly ties.
The concept of being weaned from the world is central to his ascetic demotion.
Like a child being weaned.
Exactly. A child is weaned from milk so it can eat solid food. Brainerd is weaning his soul from earthly comforts so he can digest eternal realities.
That is a great way to put it.
On February 2nd, he preaches a farewell sermon. He is riding toward Lyme, and he notes an uncommon pressure of mind.
He realizes he is throwing himself into all hardships and distresses.
He even admits it would be less difficult to lie down in the grave.
Which is saying something.
But he consciously chooses to go rather than stay.
He is actively grieving as he leaves his friends in East Hampton and Long Island.
It is hard for him.
On February 15th, he walks into a grove and says he feels more like a stranger on earth than ever before, dead to any of the enjoyments of the world.
He is intentionally isolating his heart to prepare for the literal isolation of the frontier.
And we cannot ignore the physical toll this is taking on him. His body is breaking down.
It really is.
On February 19th, he writes that he is exceeding infirm, greatly troubled with pain in his head and dizziness, scarce able to sit up.
That is rough.
Yet, just a few weeks later, on March 13th, he notes he is almost unable to stand due to weakness in the first prayer.
But then he preaches for an hour and a half.
On Enoch, walking with God, from Genesis chapter 5, verse 24, a 90-minute sermon from a man who can barely stand upright.
We have to ask, what drives a physical body to push past the desire for the grave?
Yeah, where does that come from?
We find the answer in his diary entry from March 7th. He has a realization that permanently alters his perspective on physical suffering.
Okay.
He writes that time appeared but an inch long and eternity in hand.
An inch long.
When you genuinely believe that your entire mortal life is just a 1-inch line drawn on an endless canvas of eternity, the physical suffering of that single inch loses its sting.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
The brevity of physical life renders his chronic illness, his dizziness, and his isolation insignificant compared to the eternal reality he anticipates.
Time appeared but an inch long. If you hold your thumb and index finger an inch apart and you look at that tiny gap, and then you look at the horizon, that is how Brainerd is viewing his life.
He rejects vain amusements and frightful disappointments because they all fit inside that tiny 1-inch gap.
This absolute mental resolve, combined with a breaking physical body, sets the stage for his final, grueling route to the wilderness.
The geography of this route is astonishing when you consider the weather of early 1743 and his physical condition.
It was not a paved highway?
No, not at all. Brainerd is likely suffering from the early stages of tuberculosis at this point.
Oh, man.
We are talking about hundreds of miles on horseback during mud season. There is rain, sleet, and freezing snow melt.
Just miserable conditions.
He leaves East Hampton on Long Island on March 14th. He rides 50 miles to Brookhaven, then reaches New York.
That is a long way.
He crosses over to New Jersey, visiting Elizabethtown, Newark, on March 19th, then Woodbridge. He doubles back through New York, heading north to North Castle, Danbury, and New Milford.
He is zigzagging across the colonial frontier.
Yeah.
He stops at Scaghtikoke near Kent, Connecticut, to preach to a settlement of Native Americans there.
Right.
Then he pushes on to Salisbury, Sheffield, and finally on March 31st, he arrives at the home of Mr. John Sargent in Stockbridge, Massachusetts.
He has finally made it.
The preparation is over. The deployment begins.
But notice his internal state upon arrival.
Yeah, let us talk about that.
Despite all the intense preparation, despite the divine encounters and the high spiritual flow states he experienced in the preceding months.
He arrives at Stockbridge dejected and very disconsolate.
He writes that on the last day of the ride, his mind was overwhelmed with exceeding gloominess and melancholy.
I want to challenge this because it feels like a massive narrative irony.
How do you mean?
You would expect him to arrive at the mission field in a blaze of triumphant glory, ready to conquer the world.
Right, like a hero.
He has been preaching for 90 minutes while sick. He has felt the temper of Christ. He has seen time as an inch long. You expect him to ride into Stockbridge waving a flag of spiritual victory.
Yeah, you really do.
Instead, he arrives completely crushed, despondent, and melancholy. How does that make any sense after everything we just analyzed?
It makes perfect sense when you tie it back to the core theme of his entire preparation.
Okay, lay it out for me.
Arriving overwhelmed with exceeding gloominess perfectly encapsulates his theology. He is entering the work with zero confidence in his own flesh.
Yeah.
The wilderness has not yet broken him because he is already broken.
Yeah.
He has been entirely emptied of self-reliance.
Ah, by strength.
This ensures that whatever happens next among the Native Americans at Kaunaumeek, any success, any survival,
It will be attributed entirely to God's grace.
not to David Brainerd's stamina, intellect, or emotional stability. He arrives empty-handed.
He intentionally packed no self-confidence for the trip.
None at all.
Let us pull all of this together. We have tracked Brainerd's extreme internal life over these months.
It has been quite a study.
We saw his acute awareness of his own corruption, seeing the dust in the sunlight of divine holiness.
We saw his firm rejection of selfish, performative religion and false frames during the Great Awakening revivals.
We investigated his terrifying dips into spiritual privation, where the absence of God made him feel worse than a toad.
And we witnessed his immense physical sacrifice, preaching through dizziness and pain.
Seeing time as an inch long as he literally rode horseback toward the brutal wilderness while intensely desiring heaven.
We focus heavily on measurable outcomes in our own lives today.
We really do.
We look at completed tasks, acquired wealth, or social standing. But Brainerd spent months preparing his internal posture.
Believing his soul's orientation mattered more than any external metric of success.
What if our modern obsession with quantifiable success in our callings completely misses the reality that the Creator is more interested in the breaking of the instrument than the work the instrument performs?
That is a heavy thought.
If your frames, your positive feelings, and your visible successes were entirely stripped away today, leaving you completely empty-handed like Brainerd arriving in Stockbridge,
Would you recognize your absolute dependence on the Creator for your very next breath?
that is the question to consider.
We will see you next time.